Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to start with an apology, which is probably not the best way to start a talk. But when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk here, I had a couple of ideas, and after seeing an initial list of some of the titles, I decided that I chose the wrong thing to talk about. So I'm going to talk about one of the other things that I was thinking about. So I'm just going to change this slightly. Rather than talking about integrating biology and chemistry, I'm going to talk more about, again, picking up the theme that we've heard from the speakers already, about integrating secondary school and university, and talking about this in the context of the two first-year papers that I'm mostly involved with, which is a second semester paper which focuses on biochemistry, and a first semester paper which is a general biology paper and also has a biochemistry component in it. So I'll tell you a little bit first about the second semester paper, and then I'll focus more on the first semester paper and talk about a few issues of that, and sort of my personal experiences in looking at the integration and sort of movement between high school and university. So in terms of the biochemistry paper, it's a second semester paper. It's also part of the health science first year program. We have about 1,100 students, and we have a filter which is the Chem 191 paper in the first semester. So that's a prerequisite for our paper. And that does take out some of the weaker students, and it also allows us to not worry about having to teach so much of the chemistry in our paper. So we can talk about some of those chemical principles and use the language, and other people have talked about teaching the language of a discipline. We can do that without having to worry about to teach that ourselves. So that's definitely an advantage we've got. In terms of the two broad areas that we teach in that paper, the paper's roughly split in half between a protein structure and function section and a metabolism section. And most of the material that we cover there, in terms of what the feedback students give us, it's new material to them. It's not stuff that they've covered in high school. Even though they may have heard some broad terms, they may have heard things about an electron transport chain in mitochondria, they may have heard things about certain types of proteins. What's going on at an underlying level, the sort of the more detail that we cover, they haven't sort of commented on before. And so that's an advantage for us in terms of having the chemistry prerequisite and having the interest of the students and being able to sort of involve them in some new material. What you may notice that's missing from our sort of curriculum here is any kind of molecular biology. So in our paper in second semester, we don't do anything in terms of DNA, transcription, translation, the genetic code, mutations. In fact, this is covered in one of the first semester papers that's also part of the health science first year program, which is called Cells 191. And if I push the right keyboard, that will change. So Cells 191 is a first semester paper. It's a general biology paper. It covers a bit of cell structure and function. The molecular biology section in which we teach, there's also some genetics and some microbiology. Again, a big class, 1,600 students, as I mentioned, part of the health science first year program. And the material we do in here is pretty much sort of classical early molecular biology. We do an introduction to biological molecules just so that the students do know what we mean when we talk about a protein or a carbohydrate or a fat. In the first part of the course where they look at cell biology, they do it in a completely non-molecular context. And so they hear about cells and structures and organelles without having any sort of consideration for the molecules in them. So we do an introduction to that. And then, as I said, we go through some pretty classical kind of molecular biology. Now, even though I've been involved with this paper for over a decade in various guises, I only sort of picked up doing these lectures sort of 5 or 6 years ago. And when I started doing those lectures, I obviously picked up a lecture course from somebody else, and yes, twiddled around the edges and put my own spin on it, but didn't really think about the content a lot in terms of what should the particular content be. And in doing the lectures and talking to the students, sort of started to notice from them, a lot of them saying, we've done this in high school, okay? Again, the same kind of issue of what have you done in high school and what have you done here? And this sort of it nagged at me a little bit, and I happened to be in a bookshop in town one day, and I picked up the course book outlining the Year 13 syllabus for biology, and started having a look, and noticed that, hang on, I do this, I do this. They do a lot more of this than me, even though I touched on it. And suddenly started to realise that not only were there overlaps, there were some areas where we decided to look at things much more superficially, in part for time constraints. But the students had a lot more detail, and this came home to me when a lot of students would ask quite sophisticated questions after the lecture. And I had myself think, how do you know that? Where did you get this from? So this has sort of nagged away at me, and the other part sort of that really nagged away is that if they were all getting it before, it didn't reflect in their exam performance. I mean, of course, in a class of 1,600 students, you're going to get a very broad distribution. But their exam performance didn't reflect, oh, we've all done this before and it's all the same. So last year I did a very informal survey. I've only just finished doing second semester, so it's all in my head. Did an informal survey on Blackboard. Again, Dave mentioned Blackboard, which is our online learning system. And I put a survey up there, and this was a survey just for the molecular biology section, so just for the lectures that I did in that section. And we got 609 responses, which is pretty good out of a 1600 class. And even though I'm going to show you some numbers, you'll see that it's very qualitative. And what I was really trying to do was I was just trying to get an impression from myself as to what material these students had covered and what kind of backgrounds they had when they came to the paper. Again, in coming to the paper, they didn't necessarily have to have done any biology in high school at NCA level 3 or anything like that. So I'm just going to show a few results of that and just sort of my impressions of a couple of those things. So one of the questions was just simply about how did they find the material in terms of the level of difficulty. And I mean, initially this is sort of a nice kind of pat on the back kind of thing for yourself. You know, half the class thought the level was about right, so that's good. Not too many of them thought it was easy, which is also good. We don't want to make it too easy for them. And about a third of the class found it somewhat difficult, which is what you would expect. So that was okay. But the other thing I wanted to know was how did their impressions of how they found it relate to the background that they brought to the paper. So if I then asked them and said, right, the material that we covered in these lectures, how much of it had you done before you came? And again, these are very broad terms, most of it, some of it. But I was sort of hoping that with an anchor of sort of about half or none, those that have thought they've done more, about half are somewhere in here, those